Good morning and welcome to our 2022 Remembrance Day ceremony here at the Story Arts Center of Centennial College. And I believe, if I've counted correctly, this is our 23rd. May we begin this please by asking our O Canada singer, Israel de Real, from our music performance program to please come forward and lead us in O Canada.
Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God, keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Color Guard retreat. Remembrance Day, over the years and the decades, has changed to become more of a Remembrance Week. Our Muslim brothers and sisters last week celebrated or remembered those Muslim soldiers who had lost their lives in the Second World War, of which there were tens of thousands last week. On Tuesday of this week, sit down. On Tuesday of this week, there's always a bit you miss. On Tuesday of this week was Indigenous Veterans Day, in which obviously our First Nations people remember the sacrifices of our First Nations soldiers, sailors, and airmen who gave their lives. And it's a very personal thing for me too, because one of my heroes in life is the famous marathon runner Tom Longboat, who won the Boston Marathon in 1907. And when the First World War started, he joined, and they made him a runner, which was one of the most dangerous jobs that you could do. And there's a wonderful story that I love that tells of the youth. He was running back and forth under fire, carrying messages, which is what runners did. And he came up on a colonel, and he was going by very quickly, and the colonel said to him, "Who do you think you are, Tom Longboat?" Which is one of the great stories, because he was Tom Longboat. So thank you very much for being here, and we will begin with the land acknowledgement. Centennial College is proud to be a part of a rich history of education in this province and in this city. We acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada. as we strengthen ties with the communities we serve and build the future through learning and through our graduates. Today, the traditional meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the communities that have grown in the treaty lands of the Mississauga. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people and accept our responsibility to honor all our relations. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We have a few special guests I'd like to recognize, Dean Bedell, and of course, from representing our president today is Manjit Jita, Vice President of Industry, Employment, and Community Relations, and we thank both of you for coming. And here representing the Story Arts Center is our Dean, Nate Horowitz. And for reasons you're about to find out, we welcome the journalism students of Centennial College, and this will be a very special moment for them, as you will see in a moment. Our theme today is youth and remembrance. And I'd like to begin today by showing you something on the screen over here and wherever you were watching at home. I'd like to show you a video that was done by a group of our broadcast and film students as part of their StoryWorks project last spring. I have spent most of my adult life trying to tell the tale of the youth who went off to war. It's a 5-minute video. When I finished watching this video a few months ago, I was in tears. This is one of the most brilliant pieces I've ever seen that tells and ties the youth of today with the kids who went to war so long ago in the Second World War in Korea. So we'd like to present to you now, the video Thankful.
That I see you back, I don't know where you go. If I'm alone
I'm lucky I got this far. Now I'll tell you a story. It was really rough at time, especially at night when we were chasing submarine with all these ships at pitch dark. Can you imagine that?
Every time that you leave me back, I don't know where you go no more. Every time that I see you back, I don't know where you go. If I'm alone in this world, can't deny that you by my side, that you by my side.
I got family at home and I got kids that wanna thrive. Gotta stay alive. I am loyal, not alone, and I got feelings deep inside. Gotta stay alive. I can't wait to feel my people see the love inside their eyes. Gotta stay alive. All I want is to protect my people with me in the hive. Gotta stay alive. I'm ready. I got hope. I keep it steady when I drive the boat. Always got the people around to stay afloat. Always got the people home to help me cope. I love you all, I let you know. Love you all, can't let it go. Love the world, let's drop the weapons, throwing fear out the door. Think of everything we did, giving hope to the kids. We so grateful and so thankful for the ones who gave the most. I'll give it back, I promise. Whoa.
We're so thankful, we're so grateful. the world could be hateful. I don't need to say more. I can show weakness. I must just stay strong with all my people. I know that I can't go wrong.
Miigwetcha Maganish, Miigwetcha Gichata, Miigwetcha Anakobichagan. Gana win chiga dash kakamikwa samiga dwak chawasa chigaming. Gagana win chiga sumin. Endasa Kishakaroma Mikwendagasa Mikwenim Ogichata Mikwenim Shamaganish Miigwetcha Wendam Ake Miigwetcha Wendam Gana Winja Gaza Zamgaya Winowa Jaja Migada Miigwetch
Papa je t'aime, maman je t'aime. Je suis enfant mais je connais quand même. On n'est pas ensemble, ceci mon poème. Moi je grandis petit, graine que tu sais, on n'a pas de problème.
We're so thankful, we're so grateful. The world could be hateful. I don't need to say more. I can show weakness. I'ma just stay strong with all my people. I know that I can't go wrong. We're so thankful, we're so grateful. The world could be hateful. I don't need to say more. I can show weakness. I must just stay strong with all my people. I know that I can't go wrong.
Stay strong.
Filmmakers could have done what so many of us do when they were filming those 98, 99, 100, 101-year-old veterans. They could have assumed that the veterans would they could never ask them if they'd like to do a little hip-hop dancing. But instead, they showed them incredible respect by saying, would you like to do a little hip-hop dancing? And this is important in a number of ways, because what we want to understand in today's presentation is that so many of us, as we've grown up, have looked upon the veterans of the Second World War in Korea especially as these old people. And when they have gotten into their 90s, and I lost a great friend last year, Bob Middleton, at 99 years old, that you see them as old people, but they weren't. They were you. Because when they went to war, they were 17 and 18 and 19 and 20 and 21 years old. We are represented here by a lieutenant from Royal Canadian Air Force. During the Battle of Britain, which was one of the most important moments of the war and of the century, Air Vice Marshal Downing, who was the head of Fighter Command, decreed that his squadron commanders could be no more than 26 years old. Just last week, I did a speech in Old Oakville, and I presented on a couple of young men from Old Oakville who gave their lives in the Second World War. They were both wing commanders in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And wing commander is, back in the old way that they did it, was you were, a pilot officer, a flight lieutenant, then you became a squadron leader, then you became a group captain, then you became a wing commander. These two young men were 24 and 26 when they gave their lives as wing commanders. It is young people that go to war. That is what makes war such a tragedy in many ways, because it's old people like us who make the decision, and it's young people like you who have to then go. Those people, those 17 and 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds, they were just like you. They loved to dance. They had their own songs. There was a performer back then, a jazz guy named Artie Shaw. And when Artie Shaw would do his concerts, they used to have security in the front of the stage, because the kids would charge the stage and climb up on the stage and jitterbug on the stage right where the band was, and they had to get security to drag them off. And I can see some smiles in the audience, because you've seen that at your own concerts that you go to. And they had their own anthems. There was a wonderful man named Cab Calloway. The old people in the audience are going, yes, Cab Calloway. And Cab Calloway was a wonderful performer. And he had a very famous song called Minnie the Moocher. And in Minnie the Moocher, there would be lines where he would sing, singing Heidi, Heidi, ho. And then all the audience would come back with singing Heidi, Heidi, hey. And when he did that in big clubs and things, all the young people would get up on, they were partially in the cups, of course. They would get up on the tables and scream and dance and just let it all out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Today we have three special guests. We have Trooper Jade Bloman from the Canadian Army. We have Officer Cadet Matt Goodson from the Canadian Navy. And we have Lieutenant Aaron Niles from 16 Wing Royal Canadian Air Force out of CFB Borden. And what I'd like to do now is introduce them to you. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
I'm just going to wait here until this microphone comes on, or I can move that. Microphone? There's always a way. There we are. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And thank you for coming to us. And you are a trooper.
Yes, I am.
Could you explain what a trooper is?
So a trooper is a trained private. It's like the first trained ranks in the NCM ranks. And I'm called a trooper, not a private, because of my trade. So anyone that joins the Armored Corps is considered a trooper instead of a private.
And you drive tanks.
Yes, I drive and gun tanks.
You drive tanks, and you're also trained to drive armored personnel vehicles and the LAV 3.
I'm not trained to drive the LAV 3, but I am trained to drive the TAP V, which is an armored personnel carrier.
Okay, and now you told me that you were training to be a gunner.
I've actually just completed my training in August. I went to CFB Petawawa and I did my gunner's course, so I'm done.
Okay, and you are also now in your second year in Kingston at the Royal Military College?
Yes, I'm studying chemistry major and a minor in life sciences.
Okay, and you have already, it hasn't been decided yet, but you were telling me that you have already volunteered to do a tour of duty in Iraq next year.
Yes, it's called Operation Impact. And if I do get the tour, I will be deploying to Iraq from April to November of next year.
So going in harm's way. Yes. Jade, you have an interesting background that matches up very nicely with Canadian military history and who we are today, because your father is Dutch and your mother is from Guyana, right? And of course, in Holland, any of our Canadian armed forces are treated so very specially because of the number of people from our Canadian forces, especially the Army, who gave their lives to liberate Holland in late 1944 and into 1945. And that must have, obviously, I guess your father you knew about that, and your father told you about that.
Oh, yes. And my grandparents on my dad's side are very proud.
Yes, of course. And being from Guyana, your mother, in Guyana, there was an awful lot of U-boat activity out there. So a lot of the sailors from Guyana who worked the merchant ships were going in harm's way, and many of them did not make it home because of the U-boat submarine activity, the German submarines there as well. How old are you?
I am 19 years old.
You are 19 years old, a 19-year-old tank driver. I cannot tell you how jealous I am that you get to drive a tank. But the tankers in the Second World War, it was an awfully dangerous job. And I know that one of the things that happens in the Canadian military, that you are taught the history. And being a tanker, especially if you were in some of the early tanks, which tended to blow up quite easily, it was a very dangerous job. And there were tens of thousands of casualties. As a tanker, as a young woman, as a member of the Canadian Army, what does Remembrance Day mean to you?
Remembrance Day means to me remembering all that gave their life so that I can be serving today, so that I can go home and just not have to worry about anything, so that my sisters have a chance to grow up in Canada and not have to worry about going off to war, doing basic training. Remembrance Day means to me to remember those who gave their lives so that we could have this.
Thank you very much, Jade. The Navy's here. I should explain that, by the way. Back in late 1939 into early 1940, in late 1939, the first victory for the Royal Navy was the sinking of the Graf Spee, the German, well, actually, she blew herself up, but they destroyed her, they wrecked her enough that the captain had to give it up. But the Graf Spee had been taking an awful lot of prisoners, merchant marine prisoners, and they had been transferred to a supply ship called the Altmark. And the Altmark had pulled in to a Norwegian fjord, and Winston Churchill, who was the first Lord of the Admiralty at that time, he sent a rescue mission. And they went in and they boarded the Altmark, and there was some firing and things. And then they went down looking to find deep in the ship's holds the people who had been taken prisoner. And when they got there, they opened the door and they yelled, "The Navy's here!" And it has become very much a wonderful phrase that sort of says in a very short phrase about the bravery.
Yes, indeed.
Matt Goodson, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you explain to us a little bit about what you are doing right now?
So I'm a naval warfare officer. In the Navy, things are a little bit more specialized. So when you're a naval warfare officer, you're essentially corporate management in the Navy, and we're in charge of every department on ship and ashore alike. So we get called jacks of all trades. We have to learn a little bit of everybody's stuff so that we can manage accordingly. And there's a lot of young people particularly that have served doing my job over the years, including, even back into the old Navy days, and, Britannia rules the waves, so.
What brought a young man from Aurora into the Royal Canadian Navy?
Well, I grew up in cadets, so it was always a familiar setting to me, the military. My dad also served in the Jamaica Defense Force and the Coast Guard. So, it's in my blood, and if you go back generations, my grandfather and so on, there's a lot of records to prove it. So, yeah, I definitely think it was the call of duty, so to speak.
And this was completely accidental, but in one of those strange coincidences, 2 of our 3 people up here went to the same high school in Aurora. Which high school is that?
That was St. Max. Trooper Blumen went there as well. I opened the school. In grade 9.
All by yourself?
All by myself. In grade 9, that was the first year the school opened, and then a handful of years later, Trooper Blumen went in and did her thing.
All right, so she's a little bit younger than you.
Quite a bit, yeah, definitely.
okay.
I'm the senior service and the senior member, so yeah.
All right, okay. And you are now well, I should actually say before we do that, the military paid you way through your undergrad.
Yeah, that's right. So I did 2 years as a reservist, as an NCM, which is, skilled trade worker, and I did a couple of years as a naval communicator. So on the bridge of the ship, handling everything that comes in and goes out of the ship in terms of communications. So I decided to commit and go full-time, and had the Navy pay for my degree, political science, at York University, and been here ever since.
And I understand, too, that in the Reserve Officers Training Plan, not only do they pay for your degree, they give you a salary.
Yeah, actually, it's Reg Force. So the reserves, they're sitting pretty here, the part-timers, and then the Reg Force for the full-time, they pay you salary, and they pay for your degree, and they pay for your textbooks and everything, yeah.
Oh, so you didn't get the salary part?
Oh, I got the salary part.
Oh, you got the salary part. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And you are now an OC. You're now an officer candidate?
Naval Cadet, that's the official rank, yeah.
Cadet,
And so I'm actually getting posted probably in January, early January, if not before, to Esquimalt out in Victoria. And that'll come with my commission and a promotion as well.
Yes, and you've already served aboard ship?
I have, yeah. So as an NCM, when I was an enlisted person, I got to serve 2.5 years, and I worked with ships like HMCS Winnipeg, and I was based out of the unit downtown, HMCS York.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you legitimately had saltwater stains on your cap.
Oh, I've lost my cap to sea before, so yeah, definitely.
There's an old joke because during the Second World War in Halifax, there were so many people that worked in offices. The joke about them was that every weekend they would catch the ferry to go across to Dartmouth just so that they could get salt water on their caps, so people would think they were operational. It's a running thing. Yeah. When you think back to the Second War of Korea, but especially in the Second World War, where Canada went from 5 ships to the 4th largest navy in the world in just 3 years, and Canada was such an important part of winning the Battle of the Atlantic, which was again one of the crucial victories over U-boats in the Atlantic. What does Remembrance Day mean to you?
Remembrance Day for me is a bridge to thinking about more than just yourself. It's about thinking, if you're a civilian, if you're a serving member now, if you have served before, if you're anybody really that's sort of been affiliated with our nation's history. It's a time where you can think, I'm a part of a collective, I'm a part of a society that cares, I'm a part of a group of people that live in a land that is sacred to so many, and people who are willing to make that sacrifice and be so selfless to ensure that we have the rights that we hold so dear. I think that's what Remembrance Day is about for me.
And we are honored to have you here, and we thank you for your service.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, I am a Second World War aviation historian, and so it's always very wonderful for me, not that, to have the Air Force here. Hello, how are you today?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. You may not be aware of this, but you are Lieutenant Aaron Niles.
I'm now aware of it.
Yes, okay. Could you tell us a little bit about where you're from?
Sure. So I grew up in Scarborough in Toronto. I actually did my joint program at University of Toronto Scarborough and here at Centennial College studying journalism. And then I joined the military 3.5 years ago.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a graduate of our journalism program here at Centennial College. You see, so you really can't go somewhere. And you as well went through the Reserve Officers Training Program, did you not?
That's correct. Well, I joined the military 3.5 years ago, as I stated previously. Funny enough, I was doing a story for Remembrance Day at the time, working for Global News Toronto. And it got me in contact with a public affairs officer at Canadian Forces Base Borden. And he told me about the position that was open at 16 Wing. It fit everything that I want to do in my career, and so I applied, and they trained me for 10 months to become a fully qualified public affairs officer, and I've been working in the military ever since.
Have they let you fly?
I hope not.
But shh, don't tell him. You have a very interesting military background, and I should say that my wife and I, 42 years ago, were married by a reserve, an Army Reserve chaplain. But you have an interesting history with your father.
That's correct. So my father is a chaplain in the military, recently retired. And then my great-grandfather fought in World War I, and my grandfather fought in World War II as a pilot, piloting the Lancasters and the Halifax planes in World War II and the Korean War.
And your grandfather's name was George.
That's correct, though he went by Graham, at least for me.
Yes. Are you wearing the watch?
I am.
You are. Maybe we see the watch. Okay, and could you explain? I'm going to try to see if we can get this here. Okay.
So this is my grandfather, he flew the Lancaster and the Halifaxes in World War II. This is a watch that's actually made of real pieces of a Lancaster plane. And so it's one way of commemorating his service and letting him know that even though he's passed from this earth, what he did is always going to be with me.
That's wonderful. And you have a very important job coming up for you, because in 2024 we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and your job is going to be...
So as of November 1st, I am now the Royal Canadian Air Force 2024 Centennial Team Strategic Communications Planner and Special Projects Coordinator. So I like to consider it party planner, making sure that we commemorate 100 years of the Air Force, everything we've done in Canada, domestically and abroad, and hoping that every Canadian can join us as we commemorate everything that we've done to protect Canada in the skies.
Yes, well, that's wonderful. When you're looking back, and of course Bomber Command is something that's very important to me because of the research that I've done, but there were 17,000 young men and women who lost their lives in the Royal Canadian Air Force in the Second World War. 10,000 of those were on Bomber Command. And because of your grandfather's service, and he was able to successfully get through. When you think back to that time, what does Remembrance Day mean to you?
I think commemoration and remembrance, it's in the name. We might not know the exact role every person who served for the Canadian Armed Forces has done, but we do know the values they fought for, day in and day out, for freedom and the values that we hold so dear. And so despite the fact that we don't know what they did, we know the values they fought for and what we can do. And even though they've passed, their actions still tie them towards the Canadian Armed Forces today.
And we thank you very much for your service, and we thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. What you're about to see now is a ceremony that has been going on now since for 100 years, and the parts are very carefully put together, and each one of those parts represents symbolically the losses of the First World War, and then through the Second World War, Korea, and then through Afghanistan and Iraq. And also, I should point out that when we talk about the young people who gave their lives, it's always important to me that we remember those who died in training, who died in accidents, and were in the military and lost their lives that way as well. And it's just something about the danger of being in the military that is going to happen every once in a while. And so we remember those people as well. And I want all of you to know, too, that we remember all of the youth from war, not just those from Canada, not just those from North America or from Europe, but those from South Asia, which were incredibly high numbers of casualties from South Asia, also from Southeast Asia, from China. And it's something that I think about all the time, about the young people. I have been blessed with a project, and the project is I am researching and writing historical vignettes on all 125 young men who gave their lives from my high school, East York Collegiate. And I'm up to coming up on 30 now, so it'll be 30 a year, and they're going to be finished in time for East York Collegiate's 100th anniversary in 2027. But when you get to know these young people, when you get to understand that they are not just names on a cenotaph, that they are not just people who are remembered once a year, that they were kids. And we're surrounded by them. The street back here, Mortimer Avenue, down in Pape Village, just surrounded in this area right away. And one of the ones that's most important to me is if you pass by this, 151 Mortimer Avenue, which is just over here at Pape and Mortimer. More specifically, when you go to the variety stores on the corner, and then you head your way down Mortimer, it's the first house on the right. That was the McIver house. And the McIver house was home to 3 sons and 4 daughters. And their father was the principal of Kitchener Public School, which sat right where all of the houses are now, the townhouses are now. There were 3 sons who went to war. There was Glenn, the oldest, Malcolm, the middle one, and Jack, the youngest. Malcolm was killed in a training accident after he had finished his 30 operations that bought him a 6 months off, and he was training younger navigators than he was, and he was killed in a training accident. And you can imagine what's that like, because somebody presses the doorbell, ding dong, and it's somebody to say that your young son of East York Collegiate of East York has died. And a year later, his youngest brother, Jack, he died in combat in Southeast Asia. So that house was the home of 2 incredible heroes. And they are not with us today, but the owners of that house bought it in 2019. And they decided that they were going to return it to what it had been in 1929 when the house was built. And it is there not just, and it's so beautiful inside, but it's exactly the way that the McIvers would have known it before they went to war, including the doorbell, which they found hidden in the wall and restored. And it is very important to them because the wife, Annie, her grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. So it's important to her in a number of ways. But we are surrounded by this history, and it's the history of you, of the young people. Color guard to the front. If you would stand, please. The first part of our ceremony will be the last post. The last post will be followed by a minute of silence, and then our school, Scott Greenaway, who has been our school's piper for a very long time. You will hear from him the lament. After you hear the lament, the rouse. The last post is to call the dead from the battlefield back to barracks to be together again. And when that is done, we will have Alessandra Cavallini from the Theater Arts Performance Program will come and do the act of remembrance. And so we'll begin with the last post.
shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Thank you. Color guard, raise the colors. Going to now do an introduction for you for In Flanders Fields. In 1915, during the Second Battle of Ypres, where the casualties in the First World War had already taken off to unbelievable levels, thousands dying every day, a young Canadian doctor named John McCrae came out of his dugout where he was performing combat surgery almost 24 hours a day, exhausted. He pulled out a piece of paper and he wrote a poem. And he didn't think very much of that poem. And there are two stories about how the poem wound up being published in Punch magazine later that year. But one is that Dr. McCrae put it in his pocket, forgot about it. It was found by a friend of his who sent it to Punch because he was so moved by it. But since that time, this poem has become symbolic of our remembrance. About 5 years, and I should say, by the way, that Dr. McCrae did not make it through the war. He died of pneumonia in 1918, just after he had been made head of all medical services for the Canadian military. So many of us, as we were growing up, through no fault of the people reading it, heard recitations of the last post none of the last post, I'm sorry, heard recitations of In Flanders Fields that really did not capture the drama of the piece. So what we decided to do is about 5 years ago, we asked our theater program here to provide somebody to read In Flanders Fields the way it was written, which is to the commas, like Shakespeare. And when it is read the way that it is supposed to be done, the drama of it, the meaning of it, the context of it, the responsibility of it comes out again. Returning from last year from our Theater Arts and Performance program is Lennon Segovia, who is going to read In Flanders Fields.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved, and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Now we invite Israel back to the front. This is a very interesting moment for me as somebody who was born and raised in England, because I'm 63 years old and my entire life has been singing God Save the Queen. And it is the traditional end to all Remembrance Day programs, and this will be the first time in my life that I have sung God Save the King. Thank you, sir.
God save our gracious King. God save our gracious King. God save our King. Send him victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King.
Sergeant at Arms. We thank the color guard from Royal Canadian Legion Branch 10, Todd Morden, which is just down the street here on Pape Avenue. It's something not an awful lot of people know, but there are only 2 color guards, Legion color guards, left in Toronto. That's it. And that's because Legions, the membership in Legions has grown quite old. We are very fortunate to have had them here today. I'd also like to point out too, because I think it's important, because there are so few color guards, Centennial College has its own color guard, and they will be busy tomorrow at the Remembrance Day ceremony in our main campus, and they come from our paramedic program. And we were honored to have them last year, and they did a wonderful job, but there are so few left now if you're not in the military. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the 2022 Remembrance Ceremony. I would like to thank our military guests. I would like to thank our guests from the college, 2 deans and a vice president. And I'd like to thank all of you, you young people who came to this to understand about youth and remembrance. This concludes our ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, there are coffee, tea, and cookies in the hallway. Journalism students, our military guests, young military guests today are available for interviews, and thank you very much for all for coming. Hold on, I forgot something. We're off now, but I forgot something. Olivia Callahan, our trumpeter took sick yesterday afternoon, and Olivia Callahan stepped in for her at the very last minute, and we appreciate that so much. Thank you so much.